This is Todayzine, the guide to every printed gaming magazine available in the UK, at least as of summer 2020 when we produced this series. In episode 1 we looked at the 4 titles from mega publisher Future. Last week we saw the 4 titles aimed, with various levels of cynicism, at children. Today we move into the more interesting territory of the independents. This episode's 4 titles span a range. One of them is our last games magazine we cover you'll be able to walk into a shop and buy. One of them you can't buy for any amount of money. Plus magazines that at the time of writing are primarily funded by Kickstarter and Patreon. Magazines will survive any way they can these days. Even our shop title does something Future's accountants would choke on their Mocha Mega Super Oat Latte at the very suggestion of. What is that thing? Wireframe. Wireframe is immediately interesting, because of all companies, it's published by Raspberry Pi Press. Unlike excellent sister titles Magpie and Hackspace, both of which I recommend, Wireframe has barely anything to do with the Raspberry Pi itself and contains no specific content for the machine. When I was writing this show, there was something else unique about Wireframe. It was a 56-page magazine costing £3 and coming out fortnightly. It's the first paper-based consumer games magazine I've seen to be more than monthly since Games X, about which more next season of Yesterzine. But then they announced that, as of issue 39, they were bowing to convention and going monthly. At time of writing, the first of those new issues, costing £6 and boasting 116 pages, has just fallen through my letterbox. Because yes, this is the second magazine I subscribe to, and perhaps a brief flick through this first new size issue might go some way to explaining why. Right from the start, that's a fab cover. Hotshot Racing is a new game, and not a mainstream one. Putting it on the cover is a brave and excellent decision, and the stylized screenshot look is a rather good one for it. I love the non-sequitur feature descriptions at the bottom too. Mighty Goose, Growbot, Italian game design, and Landlord Super. Wireframe has 4 sections. Attract mode for previews, interface for features, rated for reviews, and a final section that sets it apart from the other magazines, Toolbox. They devote 4 pages to their cover game with a developer interview for Hotshot Racing. Rather than talk to a random PR bod, Wireframe seemed willing to give airtime to developer Trevor Lee, who's been working on the game on his own for nearly a decade, and Sumo Digital dev director Tom Turner, whose company has stepped in to help him finish it alongside Curve Digital. We'll need to talk more about this game sometime because it looks fab. But moving on, we find out what they meant by Mighty Goose. A run-and-gun Contra-like game starring a goose. The game idea predates Untitled Goose Game, which must have been annoying to them, but should at least help with marketing. I like Wireframe isn't afraid to champion games like this that even if you read internet gaming sites you might not hear about. Among those is Landlord Super, which turns out to be what Wireframe simply describe as a Thatcher 'em up. I don't want to get bogged down in reading every page of this, but imagine House Flipper in the age of right-to-buy council houses. This is a game so British it includes American English subtitles. It's also a game named after 2 different beers, so you're onto a winner. The news section is notable for talking about the return of publisher Microprose, and the fan-made PC port of Mario 64 that an official magazine isn't likely to go within a mile of. Not least because there's no legal way to get it. Word to the wise though, you should try and get it. It's masterful and people are already modding it to be the remake Nintendo should already have done. Hilariously, if you have a modded Switch, it's also running on that, which explains the biblical and entirely ineffective ire of the Big N's lawyers. And literally now do I suddenly realise they've quoted one of my tweets on the letters page. A tweet in which I refer to the magazine being fortnightly, which is a little unfortunate. Moving swiftly onto the features, they look at something I want to at some point too. The rise, fall, and perhaps re-rise of the movie game. It used to be a thing that just happened with new movies, that you got a tie-in game of variable quality and probably from Ocean. But expanding dev time and indeed budgets pretty much killed them off. More recently though, we've started to see games being allowed to play in a cinematic universe without having to be tied to a specific film. Something like Battlefront is an obvious example, but also Mike Blittle's John Wick. The Italian games industry feature is a series of mini interviews and overviews of some of the country's studios. most notably Milestone, whose name you might not immediately recognise, but have been responsible for more decent driving games over the last 10 years than anyone, such as the official World Rally Championship and MotoGP games. Also, there's Ubisoft Milan, responsible for the surprise package of the Nintendo Switch launch, Mario Rabbids Kingdom Battle. I mentioned Toolbox earlier. Toolbox is a slightly surprise inclusion in a games magazine, because it's for the creatives. This is where the publisher starts to make more sense. Some of it is general. Konstantinos Dimopoulos, author of the Virtual Cities Atlas, talks about the design of virtual cities. Chances are you'll never be called on to do so, but you'll appreciate in a lot of games you play, spotting the tricks and best practices that make a world vibrant. Next up, Atari legend Howard Scott Warshaw, who you'll know from Yar's Revenge and being the poor bastard who had to develop the E.T. game in barely a month from start to finish. His article is an interesting description of what he calls video game flow, effectively the state of being properly immersed in a game world. Then a how-to. If you have a PC and Unity, the next 6 pages get you a long way towards creating your own multiplayer space shooter, including how to handle spawn points, control, and camera movement. It defines Wireframe that it's the first print games magazine since the glory days of CDG and the 8-bits to be very happy to print code on its pages. Now's the time to resurrect one of my other tweets. Wireframe is the games magazine that grew up with us. Even if you'll never action these tutorials yourself, this is the kind of thing we need to know as adults, to be treated like we can handle and are interested in some of the details. Film magazines aren't shy to talk about the behind the scenes, and games magazines shouldn't be either. And really, Wireframe is the only one with both the courage and the commercial presence to really do so effectively. Another important topic is accessibility. As we write this, we're in a world that is encouragingly again talking about equality of opportunity rather than equality of provision. Better minds than me have said a lot more on the subject, so I'll just refer you to the picture on the screen. Ben Bayliss is deaf, and thus has a keen interest in good subtitles, and you should read his take. You get the idea, and that's about half of what Toolbox has to teach you this month. The features section interface talks about the music of the beautiful Ori games, Lisa Evans' experience with her first point-and-click adventure release, Growbot, tactics for Call of Duty Warzone, and, in a nod to us retro enthusiasts, 6 pages on the Commodore Amiga. Reviews include Final Fantasy VII's remake, which Edge gave 7, and official PlayStation a 10. Wireframe fall on a fair-sounding 79%. In fact, all but one of their reviews falls in the range 70 to 90%. But I suspect quite a big factor in that is being picky about what they review in the first place. There is a specific retro section too, tackling those famously mainstream subjects, the Famicom Disk System, and modding of consoles. And then finally a now playing section, covering mostly Uncharted 4, a game I could not stand to play more than a couple of hours of, so who knows if their impressions of its later sections are in any way accurate. Subs to Wireframe start with a 3 for a tenner option, and continue at a perfectly reasonable £55 a year, basically an every 4th issue free affair. I mentioned scaring Future's accountants, and here's how, and also why I've gone into some detail on this issue. You can download Wireframe in a low quality but serviceable PDF. You can do this free, legally, from their own website. This is also true, incidentally, of both Magpie and Hackspace. Do this. Try it. But I suspect you'll want a high quality digital or print sub to it. It's my favourite current magazine, and it's a goddamn treasure. But if my word isn't enough, features editor Ian Dransfield, who you may know better on YouTube as Bransfield, was kind enough to do some of that Q&A stuff the kids like so much these days. Unfortunately, Ian couldn't be here tonight, so his words are read by a very expensive and complex AI that somehow has come out sounding exactly like Mike from RetroSesh. What do you see as being special and interesting about a print gaming magazine in 2020?
It's a rarity these days. Folks have been either moved across to getting all their content online or have grown up with things like that since day one. Print's actually a bit of a novelty now as a result, but there's a lot to be said for Dead Tree Media. It lends itself to longer, more in-depth features. For example, simply because it's not possible for you to click away from the screen and run off to another site for a fix of top 10 hats in games or whatever. On the other side of things, people who write for us often say how it feels, how proud they are to see their work in print. There's something about it physically being in your hands that makes it that bit more special. Obviously, that won't apply to readers much, but I'd hope the fact that our writers find the experience of writing for print so special shines through, and in turn makes the magazine more special for the readers.
Is there a games magazine other than Wireframe that you readers subscribe to?
I don't have any subscriptions anymore, no. I still pick up Retro Gamer periodically because it's brilliant, and PC Gamer falls into my lap every now and then. There was a point in my life I literally bought every games magazine in my local newsagent got in, to the point he started importing things like EGM, just so I'd have more stuff to read. Games magazines had an embarrassingly big impact on my life and the choices I made in it. I used to subscribe to Play, which I ended up working on, Games TM, which I also ended up working on, and PC Gamer, which, yes, I ended up working on.
What was your favourite games magazine from the Golden Age?
Amiga Power, which is handy because that was part of the inspiration for Wireframe, as handed down by our CEO. Its reputation has become a bit overblown through the decades, but AP was a standout mag for me at the time, and still influences a lot of my attitude towards games writing. They were harsh but rarely unfair. I mean, they got their review for Worms wrong, but nobody's perfect. I think a dose of Amiga Power would help a lot of modern games press, to be honest, but if I go too far down this route, it'll turn into an old man yells at cloud station. I also loved Maximum for a very brief period it existed, and one day intend to emulate its approach of giving Tekken 2 something like 26 pages in a single issue.
Why should we buy Wireframe?
Just to support print media, I'd say, and a variety of outlets at that. There's hardly any games magazines left, and outside of some fantastically independently produced mags, everything else comes out of Future. We're still relatively new, we launched November 2018, and it's a tough marketplace out there, even when we have the unique selling point of offering your usual gaming mag stuff alongside an in-depth coding guides and advice for devs, publishers, PRs and everyone else, written by people who know, so not us. So yeah, I think it's worth buying Wireframe to support a monthly magazine that's produced by a reputable ethical publisher and offers you a bit of variety in the voices it amplifies. Every copy we sell genuinely helps a lot. Better yet, subscribe, and if you don't want to, or can't afford to, that's fine. We give away every copy of the magazine as a free PDF, which goes live on launch day every month. Information and education shouldn't have a barrier to entry, so we make ours as small as we possibly can.
MCV Develop. It's a brave move as a paper magazine in 2020 to actively stop people buying it, but that's what MCV Develop does. Subscriptions are free to those who qualify, which basically means people in the industry. Weirdly, that included me, even before this channel. To be fair, it's still worth us looking at, because a month behind they do post all the issues to their site at mcvuk.com. That weird name is because MCV Develop is a merger between long-term trade magazine MCV, which was more about retail and selling, and the games industry development magazine Develop, which obviously looked at things more from a development studio perspective. It's had a turbulent couple of years all round, in fact. 18 months ago, they were owned by New Bay Media. If we'd done the series last year, it would have been in the Future Publishing episode. But now, it's at Biz Media. For a long time, MCV was weekly, which accounts for our reference issue, May 2020, being the 957th. The question I guess we should answer is, if you're just an interested outsider, is there anything you want to read here? Well, maybe, but obviously if you're interested in the background, rather than the games themselves. MCV does not review games, although there is some preview content just as part of interviewing players in the industry, which is a large component of the magazine, from graduates to CEOs. Inevitably right now, this is basically the lockdown issue. And a lot of the content is about coping with working from home and how sales bear up when a large portion of the population are basically locked in their houses talking to their cats. I imagine. There is a measure of cross-appeal content. The SSD feature is certainly interesting to those not in the industry. If you're interested in the direction a huge increase in storage speed might take your games in future. They also look at whether the new Sony controller, the DualSense, may herald anything useful. Hotshot Racing is apparently the theme of this episode. It appears again here as the header image for a discussion with Sumo on their current situation. and how the pandemic isn't slowing them down. And that's about what there is over 68 pages in MCV. Given it's free, there's nothing stopping anyone downloading it, but I think for most it'll be something you flick through rather than read cover to cover. It is, though, a regular insight most won't get into how the industry actually works, and that's got its own charm. Switch Player. Official Xbox dying this year brings home that, at least on a full commercial basis, single-system magazines are very much a dying breed. But you may well only have one system, and having to read all about the PS4 and especially PS5 when you own a Switch, which is an entirely different breed of machine that'll probably get increasingly few ports from the big boys, is probably irritating. And so enter Switch Player, a magazine produced by independents and who you can subscribe to on Patreon. The magazine's footprint is as small as the console it covers, but its use of a small but clear font means you're not really giving up word count to achieve that. Each 60-page magazine can be had for as little as £2 on digital, and they'll post you a physical copy for £4. Switch Player is my third and final current games magazine subscription, and it too is a treasure. Our reference issue of Switch Player is issue 40, which they celebrate by counting down the top 40 Switch games of all time. It's a good time to jump in, and don't worry, we're not going to spoil it. There's a personal history of Mario Kart, an article on how many Nintendo games apparently involve cooking, and that top 40 section. But a full 23 pages of the issue are the reviews, mostly neat and compact one-page affairs that tell you all you need to know, and using a 5-star scale that's actually really an out of 10 scale they explain in slightly baffling detail. It's a little easy-to-read package that strangely very much reflects the machine it covers, and we're proud to subscribe to it. We need to talk a little bit more about Switch Player, but for reasons that will become clear, there's another bit of business to cover. Ninty Fresh. The Switch Player team have something else they want you to know about. Still running, as of the release of this issue, is the Kickstarter for their new full-size magazine, excellently named Ninty Fresh. Now, obviously I can't tell you that much about this magazine, other than it won't be as often as monthly, that it's a full-size rather than pocket magazine, and that it covers all things Nintendo rather than just the Switch. The Kickstarter reveals a NES retrospective and a full look back at Zelda Wind Waker. It's been funded well, but there's still time to get yourself a digital copy for £2, or a print copy for £5 at the Kickstarter, which, obviously, I'll link. We also know the creator likes to reference a lot of previous Nintendo magazines by acronym. We know this because Paul Murphy from both Switch Player and Ninty Fresh was kind enough to answer some of our dumbass questions. Thanks to UK government reporting regulations regarding Nintendo magazines, his words are spoken by a slightly baffled actress who sounds a lot like Rex from Bookish Brits. What do you see as being special and interesting about a print gaming magazine in 2020?
The internet is awesome, but it moves at such a fast rate and there's nothing particularly tangible about it, and it can sometimes feel impersonal. Magazines, however, are quite the opposite. Although limited in how much content they can hold, there's a sense of satisfaction and enjoyment that only comes from having something in your hands. You can read at your leisure and easily refer to it and share with your friends. I grew up in an era with only magazines and no internet, and it left its mark on me, having made 3 magazines now. I always felt a connection and an affinity to the writers, and my love and passion for games was born from magazines. They amazed and inspired me. Many physical media forms continue to perform strongly, and others like vinyl have seen a strong resurgence. In the absence of any mainstream publishers picking up the mantle, it falls on us to pick up the slack. Already you can see the demand for Ninty Fresh.
Are there any special challenges in trying to launch a new print magazine into this environment?
We've successfully crowdfunded 2 different magazines through Patreon, with one Switch Player magazine continuing to grow and exceed our expectations. We were confident it would be well received, but there's always the unknown. Making a second magazine and making it different from your other one is the hard part. Ninty Fresh will be bigger in page count and size, so in theory, it's well over double the size, figuratively and literally. That's been hard, but we think we've nailed it. The biggest obstacle to these sort of projects is actually postage. You'd be amazed at how much it actually costs to post even a magazine around the world.
Is there a games magazine other than yours that you read or subscribe to?
I have a Readerly subscription, which for a small fee gets access to a huge range of magazines in digital form. It's not the same though, but I do regularly purchase Retro Gamer and Edge. I miss the days of Nintendo Gamer and the official Nintendo magazine, and in recent times, Games TM.
What was your favourite games magazine from the Golden Age?
ONM will probably always be the king for me, but I have fond memories of NOM, its former incarnation, and Nintendo Gamer. Superplay, Total, and Mean Machines were the staples of my childhood.
Why should we buy Switch Player and Ninty Fresh?
Both will be wildly different. SPM is a cute little monthly thing focused solely on Nintendo Switch, and each month has themed features, bespoke artwork, retrospectives, and the latest Switch goodness. But it's pretty cheap for a little magazine. Ninty Fresh is the magazine that we always wanted to make, but couldn't until now. It's full size, covers all of Nintendo, and is our homage to all of the Nintendo magazines that have come before. If you have ever said, I wish ONM, NOM, N-Gamer, Nintendo Power was still here, then Ninty Fresh is for you. Plus badges and posters and art prints. Everyone loves those, right?
And that's another 4 magazines deserving of your money, even though one of them doesn't want it. Join us next time for more of the independent mini publishers keeping the art of the print magazine running years after most people wrote them off. Good day.